Welcome back to the John Fredericks Radio Network. On the line with us now is great man, Senator Dick Black. And let me give you a little background on Senator Black. He has served in the Virginia House and Senate for 14 years, 32 years in the Marines, in the U.S. Army JAG Corps, responsible for military justice throughout Africa and the Middle East for several years. In 2015, Colonel Black was singled out as an enemy of ISIS, which called him the American Crusader. He was a Marine officer in Vietnam, flew 269 combat missions as a helicopter pilot, and his aircraft was hit by ground fire on 4 flights. He made 70 patrols as a forward air controller. Presently he's an attorney, graduated from U.S. Army War College and the Army Command General Staff College. He served in the office of JAG at the Pentagon, responsible for justice and discipline throughout the U.S. Army. He prepared executive orders for the President, advised the Senate Armed Services Committee, and testified before committees of Congress. Senator Black has met privately with the presidents and senior government officials of Lebanon and Syria, attempting to end the bloodshed in the region. Senator Black, welcome to the John Fredericks Radio Network with Colonel Mike.
Well, Colonel Mike, it's great to hear you, and I'm happy to be here with you this morning.
I am very happy you're on, sir. My first concern, and I know I've seen you on TV and I've met you in person a few times. I know you're concerned. You've been to meet Assad. I have many friends who were born in Syria, who've come to America at an early age. Great people, and I think we're making very critical bad moves. Because, if anything, Christians in the region were safe in Syria, and they were also pretty much protected in Iraq many years ago. Senator Black, we have no proof. Am I correct on this? We have no proof what's taken place as far as strikes.
No, we really don't. We are not even sure that there was a release of gas. And if there was, I think we can be almost certain that it was a staged event put on by this group, the White Helmets, which is affiliated with Al Qaeda. Mm-hmm. And your listeners will recall Al Qaeda is the group that hijacked 4 planes, flew them into the Twin Towers in the Pentagon, and slaughtered 3,000 American citizens. So here's something that I wish journalists, such as they are, would ask. Okay, the Syrian army fought a 10-week battle to liberate Ghouta from the terrorists. They had essentially finished it. The terrorists had sued for peace, and arrangements were being made. In fact, they had already bust many of the terrorists and their families out of the remaining area. All through this period, the Syrian army had never used poison gas. Nobody had ever alleged that they did. And I would like someone to answer for all Americans why on earth the Syrian government would choose to use poison gas, if they do have it at all. Why would they use it after the battle and not during the battle? And the other thing I wish that some courageous journalist would ask is, in all of these attacks, all we see are children and a few civilians, who are supposedly suffering from gas. We don't know for sure whether they are or not. But the fact is, none of the terrorist military are ever hit. Now, if President Assad were going to order a chemical strike, I'm not sure that they have the ability because they destroyed their chemical weapons, but arguably they could have something. If he felt it was so necessary, wouldn't he use it on the tens of thousands of terrorists that he's in battle with today, instead of on civilians walking baby strollers down the street?
Mm-hmm. And I think these are his people, Senator Black. These are his people, and we're the ones that caused or helped to cause it with so-called allies. And I have another question. Why was it so urgent for both the U.S. and France to act with the U.K.? I mean, why only two allies when you talk about the allies, right? NATO, where was Germany? Where was Turkey? You know, it's easily, you could look at this and remember there was an issue just a few weeks ago in the UK with regards to a Russian spy who nobody knows about that poison operation too.
Yeah, well, with Great Britain, of course, they wanted to distract from the Skripal so-called gas incident, which is starting to fall apart. The evidence on that is very poor. The people who were supposedly hit with this deadly chemical are now out of the hospital, walking around. They're fine. It's not clear what happened. I mean, they were sick, but not at all clear. You know, if there is a serious chemical agent used, you don't live through that. And so here we have this coalition that has sort of existed from the beginning. Germany has opted out. They said, no, we're not playing this game. Interestingly, now Cyprus is not a geopolitically, you know, powerful country or anything. It's an island in the Mediterranean.
Yes.
And the Turks invaded and occupied a portion of it. The rest of it are people of Greek origin, and they deliberately opted out because they know that once the terrorists, if we ever manage to achieve victory for the terrorist over the Syrian government, the terrorists have all sworn to execute all of the Christians, all of the Alawites, all of the minority groups. You're talking about a pledge by the groups we're supporting to annihilate, to execute, to have a Holocaust that will kill about a quarter of the population of Syria. So if anybody wonders why a very small country like Syria would resist two-thirds of the world's industrial and military might for 7 years, it's because the option is beheading and having the wives and the children sold as sex slaves and shipped off to Saudi Arabia, where they still view women as property to do with what they will. So the chances, I'm a prosecutor by history. My time in the JAG Corps was as a prosecutor, and you always look for a motive. And what is the motive after the battle is finished to kill 40 civilians with a gas attack, knowing for certainty that it will rain down destruction from the United States, Britain, France? We've been through this before, and the only people who have a real motive to do this are the terrorists themselves, because they know they're never blamed. They never are blamed. There's an instinctive knee-jerk reaction to say, "Oh, this is this brutal guy, Assad." Well, you never see Assad speaking for very long on television because he is highly intelligent. He is not a fellow who is given to temper fits. He actually is rather soft-spoken, almost comes across as slightly shy, but highly, highly intelligent. He is an officer, but he looks out of place in uniform, and so generally you see him in suit and tie. But you cannot talk with him or watch him on the 100 videos that are on YouTube of him being interviewed. You can't watch him and say this is a man who is a madman or who is rash and reckless. He's a very careful man who has the utter loyalty of all of the Syrians except for this handful of Wahhabist Islamists who intend to murder anyone who doesn't share their religious beliefs.
Which are probably part of the allies of our allies, the Saudi Arabia group, right? Correct?
That's correct. Now, this final group that held out in the city of Douma, they were the last group to leave. It was a large group. It was close to 50,000, but they were all sponsored, paid for, armed by Saudi Arabia, and in the end, now this has just hit the news, but in the end, when they were all bussed out, the deal was that they were to turn over the hostages. Syrian government officials believed that there were about 5,000 hostages. Even the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that there were 3,500 hostages, and they work with the terrorists. In the end, only 200 of the hostages were released. Now, I am almost certain from that what has happened is the same thing that happened to us when we pulled out of Vietnam and they were supposed to release all of our prisoners, and we knew that there were 800. We had absolute proof of 800 who were in their possession. They never came back, and I think it's almost certain that the North Vietnamese just took them out and machine gunned them down. But I think all of these people were murdered by Jaish al-Islam, the Army of Islam, and so there's a great deal of consternation in Damascus because a lot of families were very much hoping that their hostage family members would be released, and I'm afraid they're never coming back.
Well, let me ask you, doesn't this sound similar to what took place? Isn't this about a pipeline going to Europe to get some gas or natural gas? Isn't this about just dismantling the Middle East? We destroyed a Babylonian culture, the Iraqi culture. And, sometimes I think the American people or the American leadership in America acts as if they're God, Senator Black. It's unheard of, and now it's getting worse. We have this Mattis guy who's in there, and he's looking for evidence after the fact.
Well, I think Mattis is probably the only one who's shown any degree of honesty. I think it was February the 8th this year. He said that there was no evidence, and never has been any evidence, that the Syrian government has ever used poison gas. He said there's a lot of talk, no evidence. He maintained that position literally up until the day before we launched these attacks, and at that point I think he felt like, as the Secretary of Defense, he had to take another position if he were going to send our folks over there to into battle.
What do you think happened to the president?
And I understand that.
Who do you think got to the president?
The others just they're very shrill. Nikki Haley, she's supposedly a diplomat, and you never hear her when she's not acting hysterical.
Oh, right. She sounds like an infomercial.
For war with this one, war with that one. And it's just, I defy anybody to demonstrate one single thing that the United States has gained from 17 years of war in the Middle East. We've reportedly, according to some studies, 1 million Iraqis died from all of that, 500,000 Syrians, many people in Libya, and what have we gained? Nothing. We started off with a very small contingent of terrorists operating out of Afghanistan, probably a couple of hundred or so, and at the height of ISIS power, there probably were 15 or 20 mechanized armored divisions functioning. hundreds of thousands of terrorists, and this has come about because of our intervention, because we don't understand the complexities of the area, and we have been flooding them with arms. Mm-hmm. There's one group during the battle for Aleppo. There's a group called Nur al-Zinki. They were totally paid. We actually paid their salaries, and we provided all of their arms through the CIA. This is clearly documented. And during the battle for Aleppo, they were afraid that the people would rise up against them, or the people would flee, and they needed them as human hostages. So what they did, they broke into a hospital, and they kidnapped a little Palestinian boy who had a blood disease, and there are pictures of him. I actually watched the entire video of this, which most people would have great difficulty with, but he still had the IV hanging out of his arm. He was a little boy, scared to death, and these 5 members of Nur al-Zinki on the U.S. payroll, paid by the U.S. taxpayer, they took him into the center of the square. They sawed his head off with a knife and waved his head around to the crowd to make the point that if you want to mess with us or if you want to flee, this is going to be your fate. These are the people. We're on their side against the legitimate, duly elected government of Syria. And people don't realize, but Syria has a constitution that guarantees religious freedom in 3 places. It guarantees equal rights for women, and it guarantees the rule of law.
And it was a flourishing society. And by the way, going back to the days of the Bible, they don't abort children. They put women in the ground for aborting children. We do 51 million since the Roe, what was it?
Roe versus Wade.
Roe versus Wade, right. People don't understand.
They don't. Syria doesn't execute for abortion, but they don't allow abortion. But
but back in the days, back in the old Bible days, they would bury a woman up to her head if she aborted a child.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about Syria. I know that goes on in Saudi Arabia. This our dear friends, the Saudi Arabians. People don't recognize
our allies. You mean our allies that John McCain loves? Yes.
Our great allies, the Saudi Arabians. Those people still have crucifixion as an authorized punishment.
Of course they do.
And they do it. They do it with some frequency. They have beheadings, almost like it's a weekly ritual. And if they catch a child who swiped a piece of bubble gum from a store, they'll take him out and they cut off his arm.
Senator Black, we're down to the last minute. I enjoy having you on. I'd like to have you on again while this conflict goes on. I hope to God it's over. But again, thank you very much for coming back on last minute, and keep staying in the press, because nobody's going to be fighting this like you and other people like us.
Okay, well, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you,
God bless you, and God bless all of your listeners.
Thank you, sir.
Bye now.
Bye now.